Hello, my name is Dr. Kayleen Asbo. I am the music historian for the Santa Rosa Symphony, and I want to invite you to our first concert of the season. The history of classical music can be looked at as a constant search, a pushing of the edges of both innovation and expression. And our opening concert celebrates just that. On October 7th, 8th, and 9th, our first candidate for music director, Francesco Lecce-Chong, will arrive to offer a brilliant program pulsating with energy that is a mirror for how throughout history music has been interwoven with the push for innovation and the search for expanding expression. Our first piece is a dynamic piece from the young American conductor, Mason Bates. Recently named the first music composer in residence at the Kennedy Center, Mason Bates is a very innovative figure. And the piece that we're going to be listening to is a celebration of technological innovation. Called Garages of the Valley, it is a musical mirror for the explosion of creativity that happened in Silicon Valley in California. The piece begins in a state of chaos, darkness, just like those innovators who were working in their dark garages. Gradually, patterns begin to shift and coalesce and form and cohere. And when they do, we are led into a sonic journey of revelation, where little motifs pass with rapid quickness between sections of the orchestra. Much like the way in technology, we have iPhones that are consistently, repeatedly going through innovation and new iterations. This particular piece of music swells, coming together in life, brightness, brilliance, and then subsiding back into the dark. It's a beautiful mirror for the technological innovation, and it pushes the edge. Mason Bates himself walks between two worlds. Trained as both a symphonic musician with a background in classical orchestration, by night, Mr. Bates haunts the club scene where he is an electronic dance DJ. These two worlds will come together in an innovative, far-reaching, vibrant, and exciting piece of music that we're going to be hearing. Now, what Bates is doing with this piece might seem very far out to us, but I'll remind us that it's very much in the spirit of what Ludwig van Beethoven did throughout his entire career. He had inherited at the beginning of his life the keyboard instrument of a harpsichord. And over the course of his life's journey, he was constantly pushing at the edges. Give me a bigger piano, he would say. Give me a bigger orchestra. Let me break out of these narrow constraints and confines of classical form. The piece that we're going to hear, the Piano Concerto No. 3 in C minor, is a piece that does just this. Beethoven takes the idea of what a piano could and should be, and he turns it on its head. Traditionally, the orchestra would give us the initial theme of a piece of music, and after proclaiming it at some length, the soloist would enter, and tentatively, politely, gently, or perhaps playfully and flirtatiously, they would mirror back what the orchestra had done. That's not what Beethoven gives us. This particular piece of music was written as he was poised between triumph and tragedy, celebrated as the greatest concert pianist of his generation in Vienna. He had just started to discover that he was going deaf. This created within him a sense of torment, and we hear that reflected in the music. The orchestra begins ominously. It's as if fate is knocking at the door. When the soloist enters, It's as if Beethoven himself is pouring his spirit into the piano, shaking his fist and saying, "I will not be overcome by destiny." And he roars rather than entering timidly, flirtatiously, playfully. This is what the soloist does. The rest of this movement is a battle between hope and despair as the pianist asserts his individuality and as the orchestra symbolizes fate. It's a journey that at the end of this first movement ends in such a way that it's a little bit like the movie The War of the Roses, when both parties end exhausted in death. At the conclusion of the first movement, we have the fate motif going over and over in the orchestra. And we have the pianist pleading until both parties collapse. Exhausted. It's a dynamic and riveting movement. Beethoven then will take us from this sense of wrestling with fate and despair into a journey that leads us into tranquility and great beauty. And on into a rondo that dances in celebration despite the shadow of what's to come. Beethoven was in many ways the hero and the model for the last piece we're going to hear in this first concert of the season. The Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 4 is brooding and tragic. It was written during a time where Tchaikovsky was also poised between gloom and despair and hope. He had attracted a patron who was going to support him for 13 years, but he was wrestling with the aftermath of a horrible marriage that he had entered into impetuously and very inadvisedly. As he struggled with his own demons, he, like Beethoven, poured his angst into the music. This fourth symphony, then, has as its inspiration Beethoven and the way that Beethoven wrestled with his own fate. In the first movement in F minor, we have a brooding sense of drama, as well as a sense of fate coalescing and threatening the hero. We'll move through movements that are filled with grief and mourning, marked by the oboe and the haunting sounds of woodwinds. And then will emerge into a triumphant last movement where, like Beethoven, Tchaikovsky offers a musical declaration that no matter what is to come, he will triumph. This last movement begins with a catchy folk song that has drawn comparisons with Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And it ends in a blaze of brass glory with more cymbal clashes per second than any piece of written music in the classical music history. This journey then from darkness to light, from despair to triumph, the searching for patterns to make sense of our world is going to be the theme of pushing the boundaries on the edge for our first season concert. Francesco Lecce-Chang will be taking the podium, and we'll get to know him as a candidate. You're invited to attend one of the open rehearsals on Saturday for a reasonable price. And please do come an hour early to any performance so that you can hear an interview. I'll be on stage at Weil Hall, and the conductor and I will talk about his own musical journey, what his source of inspiration is, and where he sees our orchestra going in the future. Come with us on this first opening concert, a season of wild adventure, expanding the possibilities of sound as we open to the possibilities of what lies in store for the Santa Rosa Symphony's own future. I'm Dr. Kayleen Asbo. I hope to see you soon at the Green Center or at the wonderful Petulama Historical Library and Museum, where I will be offering 8 weeks of courses on the history of the symphony and the piano concerto, going into depth and detail about music of this coming season. Join us for this adventure.